I want to tell you something that still doesn't make complete sense to me, even now. The night everything changed, I was not looking for anyone. I was not hopeful. I was not open. I was sitting on a bench in Central Park at 6:40 in the evening with my coat pulled tight against the cold, and I had just finished crying so hard that my hands were still shaking in my lap. And then a man sat down next to me. I didn't know he was a billionaire. Not across from me. Not at a careful, polite distance. Next to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and quiet, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just stays. I looked up, and the man sitting beside me was not the kind of man who sits on a park bench. I don't mean that in a cruel way. I mean it in the way that you know, instantly and without question, that someone exists in a different category of the world than the one you're currently falling apart in. Dark coat, strong jaw, eyes that were looking at me with a steadiness that felt almost physical, like a hand placed gently but firmly on a table. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you want me to stay? Or would you rather be alone?" Nobody had asked me that in months. Not one person. And something about the directness of it, the complete absence of performance, cracked me open all over again. I said stay. What I did not know yet, what I had absolutely no way of knowing at that moment, was that the man sitting beside me was Elliot Marsh, the billionaire that had not willingly touched another human being in 3 years. And that's what happened between us over the next 6 weeks, which would change both of us in ways neither of us had language for yet. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Welcome back, beautiful family.
This is Danito's Stories, where the quietest moments break the hardest. And you need to understand who I was before that bench, because nothing about what happened next makes sense without it. My name is Sienna Callaway. I'm 34 years old. At the time this story begins, I had been living in Manhattan for 2 years, following a relationship I'm still finding the right words for. His name was Derek. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, completely and on purpose. I had given him 4 years. I had reorganized my life around his preferences so gradually that by the time I noticed, I was living in a city I hadn't chosen, in an apartment that felt like his, with a version of myself I barely recognized. When it ended, I didn't fall apart immediately. I was efficient about it. I packed. I got my own place, a 1-bedroom in the West Village, 3rd floor, no elevator, a radiator that knocked at 2 in the morning like it had something urgent to say. I told myself I was fine. And then 3 weeks later, I lost my job. A marketing firm. Budget cuts. My position was eliminated without ceremony or warning on a Wednesday afternoon via a 40-minute Zoom call with HR. I sat in my apartment afterward with my laptop still open and realized I had no one to call. Not because there was no one, but because somewhere in the Derek years, I had let my friendships thin to the point of transparency. I had let my world shrink to one person. And now that one person was gone, the space where a life should have been was just quiet. That was the specific kind of broken I was carrying to the park that April evening. Not dramatic, not crisis level, just the quiet, devastating kind that nobody sees from the outside because you're still functioning. You're still making coffee and answering emails and telling people you're fine. You're just completely, utterly alone in a way that nobody around you knows about. I had been walking through Central Park for 40 minutes when my legs just stopped. There was a bench near the Bethesda fountain, slightly off the main path, half in shadow from the trees. I sat down, and I cried, quietly, without performance. The kind of crying that happens when your body has simply run out of the energy it takes to hold everything in. That's where he found me. And here's the thing I haven't told you yet. I had seen him before I started crying. He'd been sitting on a different bench, 20 yards away, when I arrived. Just sitting, not on his phone, not reading, just still, in that expensive coat, with that jaw, with those eyes pointed at the middle distance, like he was watching something the rest of us couldn't see. I remember thinking, That man is drowning. In public. And nobody around him has any idea. And I found my own bench and falling apart and completely forgetting about him. Until he was next to me and asking if I wanted him to stay. Elliot Marsh, the billionaire. I didn't know that on the bench. On the bench, he was just a stranger. A still, careful, unusually present stranger who sat with me for 20 minutes without filling the silence with anything unnecessary. When I finally stopped crying, I felt the embarrassment arrive, hot and immediate. "I'm sorry," he said. "You didn't sign up for this." But when I sat down, he said, "I signed up. Just that. No performance of generosity. No. Oh, please don't worry. Just a plain statement of fact, delivered in a voice that sounded like it was used to saying exactly what it meant and nothing extra." I asked him his name. He told me. I told him mine. He stood to leave about 10 minutes later. And then, I don't know what made me do it, some reflex of honesty I hadn't expected from myself. I said, "Are you okay? You were sitting over there before I got here. You look like someone who needed the bench as much as I did." He paused. Something moved across his face. Not quite surprised. More like the expression a person makes when they've been seen doing something they thought was private. "Probably," he said. And then, "I'll be here Thursday." He said it like an offering, as it meant, "I'll come back if you will." I didn't sleep well that night. But for the first time in weeks, it wasn't just loneliness keeping me awake. It was a question. I Googled him the next morning. I'm not proud of it, but I did. And what came up in the first 4 seconds of the search stopped me cold. Elliot Marsh, founder and CEO, Marsh Capital Development, real estate and urban infrastructure, Manhattan-based, portfolio value, $2.1 billion. I sat with my coffee going cold in my hand and stared at my phone screen. I asked myself, is this the man who sat beside me on a park bench? Who had said I signed up in that quiet voice? Who looked like he was drowning in his expensive coat? Was one of the most successful developers in New York? I put my phone down on the table. I told myself it didn't change anything. It was just context. But I want to be honest with you. Part of me, a quiet and slightly terrified part, whispered, then why was he alone? He was there on Thursday. Same bench. 5 minutes before I arrived. I know because I was watching from the path before I walked over. That probably tells you something about where my head was at. We sat for almost an hour. The conversation moved differently than I expected. Not careful and polite. Not the formal exchange of two strangers trying to be appropriate. Something more honest than that. He asked about Chicago. I mentioned it briefly on Tuesday, and I found myself talking about my mother, about Derek, about the particular kind of loneliness that lives inside a crowded life. He listened. Not the way people listen when they're waiting to respond. The way people listen when they actually want to receive what you're saying. When I asked about him, he paused. Then, my wife died 3 years ago. Her name was Claire. She was an architect. She was the most precise person I've ever met. And I mean that as the highest possible compliment. He said it simply, not like someone performing grief. Like someone who had made a certain peace with a fact and was deciding, carefully, to share it. "I'm sorry," I said. "So am I," he said. And that was all. We walked the path around the fountain when we stood to leave. It happened naturally. Neither of us suggested it. We both started walking in the same direction. The city was going gold and purple at the edges, the way Manhattan does in April when the light decides to be generous. At the edge of the park where our directions diverged, he stopped. "Same time Tuesday," he said. "Same time Tuesday," I said. I walked 3 blocks before I let myself smile. The text started the following week. Not from him. From me. Small things. A message when I'd had a bad afternoon. A photo of a coffee I'd made that looked, I told him, almost professionally done. A line about an interview that hadn't gone well. He always responded. Not immediately, He was a busy man. I understood that. His responses sometimes came an hour later with the particular energy of someone who had stopped in the middle of something to answer. But he always responded. And what I noticed, slowly, was that his texts had started to come without my prompting. A photo of a job site uptown with the caption, "Structural disaster. Fix it anyway." A single line at 10 p.m. one night. The park was better with someone in it. I read that one 4 times. 3 weeks, a Tuesday evening, 11:30 at night. My phone lit up with his name, and I picked up without thinking, my heart doing something entirely undignified. "You sent me a voice note," he said. I froze. I had been recording a message to my brother, a long, rambling update about my life that I'd been composing in my kitchen, and I had apparently sent 47 seconds of it to the wrong contact. "Oh God," I said. "Elliot, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean Sienna." His voice was quiet, careful, the way it got when he was about to say something that mattered. "Are you okay?" "Because you sounded—" "I'm fine," I said quickly. Silence. "You were crying?" he said. Not accusatory, just true. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why. My legs just went. "I have bad days," I said. I thought I was getting better, and then tonight was just, I don't know, a bad one. He didn't rush to fix it. He didn't offer solutions or perspective. He just stayed on the line. I could hear him breathing, hear the faint ambient sound of wherever he was, his apartment, imagined high up, city spread below. "Tell me something good," he said finally. "One thing. Doesn't have to be big." I thought about it. "The coffee I made this morning was actually perfect," I said. "Like, genuinely good." "There it is," he said. We stayed on the phone for another hour. Talking about nothing. Talking about everything. I was on my kitchen floor, and he was wherever he was, and somewhere around 1 in the morning, I realized this was the most human I'd felt in 2 years. When we finally said good night, I stayed on the floor for a few more minutes. Not because I was sad, because I was afraid of what I was starting to feel, and I needed a moment to sit with that honestly before I stood up and carried it into the rest of my life. The following Thursday changed everything. We were walking the path around the fountain. It had become our routine, sitting and then walking, the conversation always finding its real depth about 20 minutes in. He was telling me about a development project in the meatpacking district, something about a zoning conflict that had apparently consumed his entire Monday, and I was listening and watching his face, the way it shifted when he talked about something he cared about. And then his phone rang. He glanced at it. Something changed in his face. Not fear, not quite, but a particular kind of bracing, the way a person looks when something they've been avoiding has finally arrived at the door. He let it ring. "You can take it," I said. "It's not, no." He put the phone back in his pocket. "It's my lawyer." I didn't push, but something in the way he'd said it, the specific flatness, told me it wasn't a business call. We walked in silence for a moment. Then he said, "There's something I haven't told you. I've been carrying it for 4 weeks, and I'm not sure I know how to say it yet." My stomach dropped. In a way stomachs drop when you've been happy about something and suddenly understand you might not have the full picture. "Okay," I said, carefully. "When Claire died," he said, "she had made certain financial arrangements. A trust. Portions of the estate went to her family. One of my properties, the first one I ever built, in Tribeca, there's a legal challenge. Her brother believes he has a claim." He stopped walking. "The case goes to arbitration in 30 days, he said. "And depending on how it goes, I may lose the building." I looked at him. This man had built a $2 billion portfolio. He showed up at a park bench twice a week because it was the only place he'd found, apparently, where he could breathe. "Is that why you looked like you were drowning the first time I saw you?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Partly," he said. "The other part is that I've been sitting on a bench in Central Park twice a week for 8 months, talking to nobody, and then you showed up and asked me to stay, and I haven't been able to want the park to go back to what it was before. The city was loud around us. I didn't say anything immediately, because he had just told me two things at once. He had told me he might be about to lose something that mattered enormously. And he had told me, carefully, plainly, in the way he said everything, that I mattered too. Those two pieces of information needed a moment to settle. We were at the corner where our directions split. The usual corner. The corner I'd started thinking of as ours, without having any right to. He turned to face me, and the way he was looking at me, that steadiness, that particular focus, made everything in me go completely still. Sienna, Elliot. He reached up, slowly, giving me every opportunity to step back, and tucked a strand of hair away from my face. His fingers barely grazed my cheek. And yet, I want to say something, he said, and I need you to hear it correctly. Okay. I haven't, he stopped. Started again. I haven't let myself want something in 3 years. A person, someone specific. And I am aware that this is terrifying for reasons that are entirely my own problem. Elliot, I'm not finished, he said. Quiet. Direct. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know where I am. Not because I'm backing away, but because I'm asking you. I'm asking you to be patient with me, while I figure out if I'm still capable of this. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I stepped forward, took his face in my hands, and kissed him. Soft, brief, barely a question. When I pulled back, his eyes were closed. He stayed very still. Then he exhaled. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. He pulled back the following week. Not dramatically. Elliot didn't do drama. He did it in the way that careful people do, by degrees, with reasonable explanations, until the reasonable explanations add up to something that isn't reasonable at all. Earlier exits. Shorter texts. The call stopped. I watched it happen, and I said nothing for 4 days. And then, on the 5th day, I texted him, "You're doing the thing where you leave before you actually leave." I see it. He didn't respond for 2 hours. Then, can we talk? Not by text. He came to the park that evening without our usual Tuesday timing. Just showed up. I was already there because I'd been going every day regardless. After all, the park had become the place where I felt most like myself, and I wasn't willing to give that up even if he was. He sat down. He looked tired. Not physically. Elliot always looked composed in his body. But in the eyes, the way a person looks when they've been fighting something in their own head for a week and losing. "The last time I kissed you in our last meeting," he said. And I went home, sat in my apartment, and I understood very clearly that I am not a man who knows how to be halfway about anything. And halfway is all I thought I could offer. "Who asked you for halfway?" I said, "Nobody. That's the problem." He looked out at the path. "The last time I was someone's reason to hold on," he said, "I watch her die. And the version of me that walked out of that hospital is not. I have not trusted that man with anything valuable since, because I know what it costs when he fails. I let that sit. I let him have the full weight of having said it. Then I said, "Elliot, I'm not asking you to be unbreakable. I've had unbreakable. I know what the performance costs. I'm not asking for perfect or fearless or completely healed. Then what are you asking for?" "Someone who shows up," I said. "Honestly, that's it. That's the whole list." The park was quiet. A couple walked past with a dog. A child was laughing somewhere near the fountain. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached over and took my hand. Not dramatically, not with any grand gesture. Just took it. Held it with the quiet steadiness that I had come to understand was simply how he did everything. "I can do that," he said. We stayed on that bench until the light was nearly gone. When we finally stood to leave, he didn't step back from me the way he usually did, creating that careful, maintained distance. He stayed close, and when I looked up at him, he kissed me. Really kissed me. Not the careful, asking thing from the week before. This was certain. This was the kiss of someone who had made a decision and was no longer managing it. When he pulled back, I pressed my forehead to his jaw. He put both arms around me and held me the way he'd held me that first evening, firm and steady and completely present. And standing in the middle of Central Park at dusk, held by a man who hadn't held anyone in 3 years, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Safe. Not because he was powerful or wealthy or certain, but because he was honest. And honesty, I had learned, was the rarest possible thing. 3 days later, he called me at 7 in the morning. Not a text, a call, which meant something. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need to tell you in person. Can you meet me? We met at a cafe on West 72nd Street. He was already there when I arrived, 2 coffees on the table, an envelope in his hand that he set down carefully, the way you set something down when you're not sure you're ready to open it. This came 2 weeks ago, he said. I didn't tell you. I've been trying to decide what to do with it. The envelope had been forwarded from a previous address. The return address was a city in Connecticut I didn't recognize. It's from my father's brother, he said, a man named Daniel. I haven't spoken to him in 19 years. He told me the story, the father's death, the co-signed debts, his mother's house, the collapse that followed, the 19 years of silence that he had maintained without regret. The letter is 4 pages, he said. He's been sober for 9 years. He's not asking for forgiveness. He says that explicitly. He just wanted me to know he understood what he did. He looked at me across the coffee cups. He mentioned Claire. He read her obituary. He said he wanted to reach out then and decided he had no right. I looked at the envelope. Have you written back? I said, not yet. What are you waiting for? He was quiet. I think, he said slowly, I was waiting to tell you first, because you're the first person I've told anything to in 3 years. And this felt like something you tell someone. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. Right back, I said. Not for him. For you. Because Claire would have. He looked at me, and I watched something shift in his face, the specific shift of a person who has just had something they already knew confirmed by someone outside themselves. That evening, he wrote the letter. The arbitration ruling came on a Friday. He texted me at 3 in the afternoon. One line, keep the building. I was in my 3rd week at my new job, a communications firm, Midtown, a position that fit me in the way jobs rarely do. I read his message at my desk and felt that clean, uncomplicated happiness again, the kind that belongs entirely to another person's good news. I wrote back, dinner, tonight, I am cooking, 3 dots. Then, you don't have to do that. I know, 7 p.m. Don't be late. He was there at 6:58. I made pasta, nothing ambitious, a simple tomato and basil, the kind my mother used to make when she was in a good mood, which was not often enough. He brought wine he clearly knew about, and I clearly didn't, and we ate at my small table in my West Village apartment with a knock-knocking radiator and the 3rd floor walk-up, and it was the most ordinary, most completely right evening I could remember. After dinner, we sat on the floor with our backs against the couch. I don't know how we got there, it just happened, and he told me things about Claire he hadn't told me before. How she used to reorganize his desk without asking and somehow always made it better. How in the 11 months between her diagnosis and her death, he had learned everything about living inside borrowed time. How the man who walked out of the hospital in November 3 years ago was someone he was only now, he said, looking at me, starting to recognize again. I leaned my head on his shoulder. He put his arm around me. I want to ask you something, he said. Okay, and I want you to answer honestly. Not the easy answer. When do I ever give you easy answers? I said, almost a smile. Fair. He was quiet for a moment. Are you staying? He said. In New York. Are you building a life here? Or was this still temporary in your head? I really thought about it. About the 3rd floor walk-up and the radiator and the new job and the park and the bench in him. I'm staying, I said. Good, he said. Just that. Good. When he left that night, I walked him to the door, and at the door, he turned back. The hallway light was dim, and the city was making its low, constant sound outside, and he looked at me with that steadiness, that complete, unhurried focus, and I thought, this is what it looks like when someone chooses you without drama, without performance, without anything except the quiet certainty of it. And he kissed me at the door. Slow, certain, the kind of kiss that isn't asking anymore because it already knows. When he pulled back, he kept his forehead against mine. Same time Tuesday, he said. Same time Tuesday, I said. He walked down the hallway. I stood in the doorway until he turned at the staircase and looked back at me one more time. And I knew, not with the trembling, uncertain feeling of the early weeks, but with something settled and solid and real, that this was not a beginning. This was already the middle of something, and the middle felt like more than most people ever get. Here's what I know now, standing on the other side of everything I just told you. The bench was not an accident. Two people do not end up sitting 2 feet apart on a Tuesday evening in April, both quietly coming apart in their own separate ways by chance. I don't believe that anymore. I believe we were both there because we had run out of other options. Because every careful wall, every managed distance, every quietly closed door had finally brought us to the same piece of cold iron and wood in the middle of a park. And someone had to be the one to stop. Someone had to be the one to say, stay. I'm glad it was him. I'm glad he's a man who, for all his silence, for all his careful distance, for all his 3 years of holding his life at arm's length, sat down. Because the most extraordinary things in my life have not arrived with noise or announcement. They arrived quietly, like a man in an expensive coat sitting down next to a crying stranger and choosing to stay. If this story stayed with you, if you felt even one moment of it, please subscribe. New stories every week. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had a stranger change your life? Drop it below. I want to know.